Justice delayed. The cold case that finally got solved. For 28 years, the family of Diane Harper lived without answers. Every birthday that passed, every holiday that came and went, every time they gathered around the dinner table, there was always an empty chair and an unspoken question hanging in the air. What really happened to Diane? Who took her from them? And would they ever know the truth? Diane was 34 years old when she was killed in 1994. She left behind a husband and 2 young children. The case was investigated, leads were followed, but nothing ever stuck. Eventually, it went cold. Detectives moved on to other cases. The file got thicker with time, but thinner with hope. For nearly 3 decades, it seemed like justice might never come. Then, in 2022, everything changed. A cold case detective who had been reviewing old files decided to take one more look at Diane's case. He sent some evidence that had been sitting in storage since the 90s to a lab using technology that didn't exist when the murder happened. Within months, they had a DNA match. Not just a match to an unknown person, but to a name. A man who had been living freely all those years. Just a few towns away. This isn't a story about a case that was solved overnight. This is a story about how long justice can take. How much pain can build up over decades. And how sometimes, even after almost 30 years, the truth can still find its way out. Today on Shadow Files, we're going to walk through the murder of Diane Harper. We're going to look at why the case stayed unsolved for so long. What finally broke it open. And what it felt like for her family when justice, delayed for nearly 3 decades, finally arrived. Disclaimer. Before we continue, I want to be clear. We tell these stories with respect for the victims and their families. We focus on the facts and the investigation process. We will not sensationalize violence or treat these cases as entertainment. These are real people, and we handle their stories with the care they deserve. Diane Harper was 34 years old in the spring of 1994. She lived in a small town called Rockford, Michigan, just outside of Grand Rapids. She worked as a teacher's aide at a local elementary school and was known in the community as a kind, hard-working woman who loved her family deeply. She had been married to her husband, Tom, for 12 years. They had 2 children, a 9-year-old son named Jacob and a 6-year-old daughter named Lily. Diane's life was busy but stable. She woke up early every morning to get the kids ready for school, worked during the day, and spent her evenings helping with homework or cooking dinner. On weekends, she often visited her parents, who lived about 30 minutes away. People who knew her described her as reliable, gentle, and someone who always put her family first. On the evening of April 22, 1994, Diane finished her shift at the school around 4:30 p.m. She picked up her children from after-school care and drove them home. Around 6 p.m., she spoke briefly on the phone with her sister. She mentioned that Tom was working late and that she was planning to make spaghetti for dinner. That was the last confirmed conversation anyone had with her. Tom got home from work around 7:45 p.m. when he walked through the door. Something felt off. The house was unusually quiet. The kids were sitting on the couch watching television, but Diane wasn't in the kitchen like she usually was. He called out for her. No answer. He checked the bedroom. Nothing. He checked the basement. Nothing. Then he went into the garage. What he found there changed his life forever. Diane had been killed. The scene showed signs of a struggle. But it didn't look like a random break-in. Some items in the garage had been moved, but nothing valuable appeared to be missing. It felt personal. Tom immediately called 911. Police arrived quickly and secured the scene. Detectives began processing the garage and the surrounding area. They collected fingerprints, took photographs, and looked for any signs of forced entry. The side door to the garage had been forced open, but there were no clear footprints or other obvious clues left behind. In 1994, DNA technology was still relatively new and not widely used in routine investigations. Especially in smaller departments, they collected several items that might have had biological material on them. But testing everything thoroughly wasn't something they could easily do at the time. The initial investigation focused on people close to Diane. They spoke with her husband, her co-workers, and neighbors. Tom had a solid alibi. He had been at work with several co-workers who confirmed he was there until after 7 p.m. Her ex-boyfriend from years earlier was also looked at but had moved out of state and had an alibi as well. One name that came up during interviews was Gary Thompson, a man who lived a few streets away. He had done some odd jobs for the Harpers in the past, including helping Tom with some work in the garage a few months earlier. A neighbor mentioned seeing Gary's truck parked near the Harper house around the time Diane would have been home alone. But when police questioned him, he denied being anywhere near their house that evening. Without more evidence, they couldn't hold him. As weeks turned into months, the investigation lost momentum. No strong suspects emerged. No clear motive could be established. The case slowly went cold. By the end of 1995, it was officially classified as a cold case and moved into long-term storage. For Diane's family, the pain was almost unbearable. Tom had to raise 2 young children while grieving the loss of his wife. Jacob and Lily grew up with only vague memories of their mother and the constant knowledge that whoever hurt her had never been caught. Every year on the anniversary of her death, the family would hold a small gathering and talk about her. But the question of who did it and why never went away. Over the next 2 decades, the case was reviewed a few times by different detectives. Each time, they would pull the old file, read through the reports, and look at the evidence. But without new leads or better technology, there was little they could do. The file would go back on the shelf, and the case would remain unsolved. Then, in 2019, a detective named Detective Laura Bennett was assigned to review some of the older cold cases in the department. She had a strong interest in cases that might benefit from modern forensic technology. When she read Diane Harper's file, something stood out to her. There were several items that had been collected from the garage in 1994 but had never been fully tested because the technology at the time wasn't advanced enough. One of those items was a small piece of fabric that had been found near Diane's body. It didn't seem particularly important at the time, but Detective Bennett wondered what modern DNA testing might reveal. She sent the fabric, along with a few other items, to a specialized lab that used the latest touch DNA technology. Months passed. Then, in early 2021, the lab called with results. They had recovered a partial DNA profile from the fabric. It didn't match Diane or anyone in her family. When they ran it through the system, it didn't immediately match anyone with a criminal record. But then they uploaded the profile to a genetic genealogy database, something that wouldn't have been possible even 10 years earlier. Within weeks, they had a lead. The DNA was linked to a family line that included Gary Thompson, the same man who had been briefly looked at back in 1994. Detectives obtained a warrant and collected a fresh DNA sample from Gary Thompson, who was now in his late 60s. When they compared it to the evidence from 1994, it was a match. Faced with the DNA evidence, Gary Thompson eventually confessed. He told investigators that he had gone to the Harper house that evening with the intention of stealing some tools from the garage. When Diane came out and confronted him, things escalated. He said he hadn't planned to kill her, but he panicked after realizing what he had done. He was charged with Diane Harper's murder. In 2023, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Diane's family, the resolution brought a complicated but necessary sense of closure. After nearly 30 years, they finally had answers. They finally knew who had taken their wife and mother from them. They were able to hold a memorial service where they could speak her name and remember her life, instead of just mourning her death. Tom Harper, who had raised his children alone and carried the weight of that unsolved case for decades, said in a statement after the conviction that while nothing could bring Diane back, knowing the truth after so many years gave him a kind of peace he hadn't felt since 1994. Detective Laura Bennett has spoken about how this case showed her the importance of never completely giving up on old investigations. She believes that many cold cases from the 80s and 90s could still be solved if departments are willing to re-examine old evidence with today's technology. Genetic genealogy, in particular, has changed what's possible in ways that would have seemed like science fiction back when these crimes happened. Diane Harper's story is one of patience and persistence. It's a reminder that justice can be delayed for a very long time. But it doesn't always have to be denied. Sometimes it just takes the right person, the right tools, and the refusal to let a case stay forgotten. Her family waited almost 30 years for answers. They never stopped hoping that one day they would know what happened to her. And in the end, that hope was rewarded. Thank you for watching this episode of Shadow Files. These kinds of cases show us that even after many years, answers can still be found. If this story moved you, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. It really helps the channel. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, as long as you keep them respectful. We'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourself.